so much. Good morning, everyone. It is absolutely my pleasure to be here. As you've heard, my name is Dr. Adrienne Jones, and I'm a political science professor, and I'm director of the pre-law program here at Morehouse College, along with Professor Winfield Murray, who's an attorney at HUD. Our office is now on campus and full-time, and I want everyone to know that you may consider law school from any major, and we are available to provide you with advisement and help with your journey to law school if you are interested. I'd like to let you know, for instance, that on Saturday, we will have a free practice LSAT at 10 o'clock in the leadership building. And next month, we will have a personal statement workshop on the 20th at 5:30 p.m. in Wheeler Hall. If you'd like more information about that, please contact me. And if you need advisement from any major, please come and see us. This morning, I'm honored to introduce a professor from my alma mater. Professor John A. Powell is an internationally recognized expert and writer in a wide range of subjects, including civil rights and civil liberties, race, structural racism, ethnicity, housing, poverty, and democracy. Powell earned his undergraduate degree at Stanford University and his JD at the University of California at Berkeley Law School. He's taught at a number of law schools, to name a few: Columbia, Harvard, the University of Miami. He has served as a public defender in the city of Seattle. He was a former director of legal services for the city of Miami. He is a former national legal director for the ACLU. And he has served as a consultant living in Africa to the governments of Mozambique and South Africa. Professor Powell is the former executive director of the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at The Ohio State University, and he founded and directed the Institute on Race and Poverty at the University of Minnesota. Today, Professor Powell teaches law, African American studies, and ethnic studies at the University of California, Berkeley's Law School, where he holds the Robert D. Haas Chancellor Chair in Equity and Inclusion and leads the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society, an institute which brings scholars, organizers, communicators, and policymakers together to identify and eliminate barriers to an inclusive, just, and sustainable society, to create transformative change and make a more equitable nation. He's the author of a number of books, including Racing to Justice, Transforming Our Concepts of Self and Others to Build an Inclusive Society, in which he invites readers to rethink their understanding of race, race identity, and racism that has developed in Western thought. Professor Powell is an example of someone who daily brings his vast academic knowledge to bear on practical real-world issues. He's had success making positive change and stimulating future improvement. And I think that this is a time in our history and development when that kind of work is sorely needed. For example, Professor Powell is joining us today to participate in the Advocacy in Sports workshop that's being hosted here. Welcome to all of you who are here as a part of that workshop. And I want to note that his message is important for members of the community, as you are future Morehouse graduates who will soon be leaders, and he will help us to change and develop our ideas about race and bring those to a practical application when we get out into the world. I would like to welcome him to the podium now, Professor John A. Powell.
Thank you, Professor Jones, and thank you, Professor Davis, and all of you. I want to just start off by saying it's just a pleasure to come here and be at Wakanda. And I say that in jest, but I'm also very serious. So let me just get a show of hands. How many of you have seen the Black Panther movie? All right, all right. Yes, yes, yes. So my colleague Gerald Lenoir is here with me, and one of the things we did in Oakland, where the movie was situated, where the director of the movie lives, we rented out a theater and bought all the tickets and gave them out to the community, and then had a discussion afterwards. And there were people there, everybody was welcome, it was majority Black, but people were there who were crying just for a representation of seeing Black people Afrocentric in an incredibly positive light. And I want to sort of tie those two things together and tie my conversation here with you and also my conversation with athletes. Because I think sometimes we don't appreciate how important our lives are, not just to ourselves and our families, but to the larger community. For people to be able to see, and they said, I lived in Africa, my oldest daughter was born in Africa. They said in Africa, people are really going crazy. It's like, this is important. But there are also some themes in the movie that I think are really important for you here at Morehouse. And I want to weave those in. So one of those themes, of course, is Wakanda's relationship to the rest of the world. And so I want to suggest, what is Morehouse relationship to the rest of the world? And as Dr. Jones suggested, your role in terms of giving back to the community is critical. And some people are saying, there was a governor of Louisiana who was saying, well, we don't need HCBUs anymore. As we know, we sort of dealt with that. The civil rights movement is over. Now students can go to historically white colleges. That's a possibility. So we don't need historically Black colleges anymore. And I think not only is that wrong, I think we needed, not only as much as we needed before, we needed to actually pivot to a new role. And I want to talk about that new role a little bit. And the role, and that role is the Wakanda role. Because from my perspective, I think the country is lost. The leadership in the country is seriously lost. If you think about the federal government. And the implications of that are profound. It's not just, it will make it hard to be Black in the United States. It will make it hard to actually even think about having a planet to live on. So the issues are actually incredibly important, and they're technical and they're complicated, but they're also straightforward. And part of the thing is, the issue that's driving so much of the country today, and this is what my book, Race and Injustice in part, is about, is can we create a society where everyone belongs? Can we create a society where everyone is valued? And every 2 years we hold a big conference at Berkeley, and we're going to hold it next year, and all of you are invited. And the conference is on othering and belonging. And the theme of the conference is about how do you actually create not just a discourse, but also structures, policy, cultures where everyone belongs. And you can actually cut that across a number of different axes. So you can talk about in terms of racially, gender, disability, sexual orientation, or some combination. How do you actually create a society where everyone belongs? Now, when you think about that, the big thing in some ways is sort of blocking that in terms of America right now, when you have people who are actively going around talking about white supremacy, talking about white nationalism, is they're really trying to, in a sense, claim that the country, one, belongs to them, and two, that even if there are other people who are not them, they have the right to dominate. So that process of actually denying full humanity, which is what historically black colleges and universities came out of, the process of the country sort of struggling with, are black people fully human? Do they belong? And in a sense, as a national question, we're still grappling with that. And so now the question is answered in something like, well, yeah, black people belong as long as they stay in their place. So now, what's that place? Well, the place used to be the plantation. Okay, we've expanded it a little bit. Now it's called whatever, the ghetto, or the inner city. And I like to say sometime in terms of talking about the inner city, I lived in San Francisco, now I live in Berkeley. I grew up in Detroit. When I grew up in Detroit in the 1960s, there was no inner city, there was just a city. And once black people moved in, they renamed it. They called it the inner city. And in case you haven't heard, the inner city is a scary place. So every so often you hear something like, what happened to Sally Smith? I don't know. The last time I saw her, she was going into the inner city. You know, it's like people disappear in the inner city. And again, the inner city became a place where blacks and then later Latinos and others were consigned without resources and oftentimes without hope. And we built walls around a place called the inner city. And for those who maybe were a little more scary, we built prisons, which largely became populated with blacks and other dispossessed people. And now we're talking about building a wall 2,000 miles long across our border. So it's a process of saying we are a country as a national policy engaged in profound othering, denying full humanity for people. And I would say to the athletes, it's not that different for you. Now, many of you have probably made millions of dollars and had incredible lives. And so things have changed. But there's still this notion of you have your place. So that we can say to LeBron James, your place is not to speak out about black people being killed by the police. Your place is to dribble the basketball. Your place is to block on the line. Your place is to be quiet and entertain largely white people so they can enjoy themselves. And I want to say it's important for us not only to reject that, but as we sort of assert our place in terms of the full breadth, humanity, creativity, and joy of humanity, we are doing so in a way that two things is about humanity, about the larger humanity. So some people, when they grapple with the concept of othering, they say, okay, I get it. You know, we ignore that some people are fully human. We deny that some people are like me. And so for people who are more liberal, we think the solution to othering is what I call saming. You're just like me. Yeah, you know, you may be of a different hue or even a different religion, but you're just like me. So the problem or the intervention for othering is not saming, it's belonging. And again, going back to Wakanda, so why am I going back to this theme? So one of the issues in the movie was that, okay, they figured out something. They figured out how more or less to live in a healthy society. And one of the things I loved about the movie is it had this really wonderful relationship between technology and nature. Now, I live in the Bay Area. We've more or less figured out the technology part, but not the nature part. And certainly not the human part. And certainly not the inclusive part. So Wakanda had some of that stuff figured out. What they didn't have figured out was how do you share that with the rest of the world? How do you actually take all the resources, not just technical resources, but the human resources, and share it with the rest of the world? How do you take the spiritual grounding of communalism? One of the things I loved about the movie is that most superhero movies, there's one person, usually a guy, except for Wonder Woman, who is out there by him or herself, and they don't need anybody else. They're an updated John Wayne. Wakanda was not like that. It's like it was a community, and it recognized that in order to be effective, it had to be the community. And they kept extending the community out. To me, that's, not to romanticize, but that's not deeply grounded in terms of Western thought. Western thought is sort of grounded on the notion that you are alone in this world by yourself. You changed your own diaper when you were growing up. And then later you got some boots and you pulled them up by yourself. And you're a self-made man. Usually is a man. Of course, that person doesn't exist and shouldn't exist. We're in deep relationship with each other. And it's really wonderful to be here with you, sort of witnessing the expression of that. And that part of your education is about your relationship with the community and giving back to the community. And again, I want to just come back and say, I want to celebrate that, but also suggest that community will have to be enlarged in some way. When I was growing up in Detroit, it was fighting words to call someone an African. You call them all kind of names, but call them an African, you had a fight in your hand. We didn't extend our community to Africa. We talk about immigration. About 10% of the immigrants coming to the United States are from the African continent. And so this actually takes us to another area. When we think about black, we're not clear what we mean by black anymore. I was at a meeting in Minneapolis, and people were talking about building black wealth, and we had a wonderful meeting with leaders and private sector and philanthropists and teachers. And in the meeting, someone said, so we have to figure out how to build wealth in the black community. But then someone said, but those people from Nigeria, they're not really black. And then someone else said, and those people from the Caribbeans, they ain't black either. They kept going, and it said, and those people who are from those interracial marriages, they're not black either. And I said, oh, wait. Do you hear yourself? Do you hear yourself? And I said, well, we're talking about the African-American experience. I said, that's not what you said. You said black. And you're defining it narrowly. You are engaged in what I would say is othering. You're saying somehow your experience is the only experience that counts. And we're starting to slice and dice and actually fracture our own community as we do that. So again, going back to Black Panther, in this case, quoting Killmonger, when he says, I have to take care of my people. And he says, aren't all people from Africa? Aren't all people from Africa? Aren't all people from Africa? And I'm sure some of you may have seen, they just found an early rendition of someone in the UK. And they were shocked, because they found them actually 10 or 15 years ago. But the technology has just advanced so that they can actually replicate what the person actually looked like, how tall he was, black. Really? You trying to tell us that early Britons were black? Yep, black. And eventually, because of the climate and other conditions, lost melanin and became lighter skinned. So my point is, when people say, do we need historically black colleges? Usually what they mean, appropriately so in some respects, is do black people need historically black colleges? And my answer would be yes. But I would go further than that. And I would say, and I don't mean for them to flood the admissions, although I'm not opposed to having white students come here. It's not my choice anyway. But white people need historically black colleges. That if we are going to survive as a people, and as a race, and as a nation, and as a world, the things that you have, that we have to share with others. Now, that may sound odd, because I know a lot of times we feel like we actually don't have all that much. But we have something. And I'm going to just give you a couple of things, and I'm going to open it up for questions. I'm 6 of 9. My parents are from Missouri and Mississippi. They grew up as sharecroppers. My father dropped out of school in the 3rd grade. My mother passed away a few years ago. My dad just turned 97. And we have this incredible family. I mean, it's incredible. I have had the opportunity to meet a lot of impressive people and people in positions of power and authority. So in Detroit, the number one hospital is called Henry Ford. The head of Henry Ford's hospital is a friend of mine. And 2 years ago, I was in France writing a book, and I got a call saying, your dad has taken a fall, you need to come back to Detroit as soon as possible. I came back, and my dad was in hospital, and then he was in Henry Ford's hospital. They said he had injured his brain, and I called my friend, and I said, I know you take care of all people, but this is my dad, so I really want you to, step up your game. Best doctors, everything. He said, you got it. After about a week, he said, he called and he said, we've done everything we can. Your father's brain is literally being liquefied. We think we should send him home to die. And so they sent my dad home. We had a visual at the house. Everybody came. We had probably 100 people coming through the house. So my dad was never alone. Someone was always there with him, massaging him, singing to him, being with him, just getting ready for him to die. And my dad was ready to die. He's a Christian minister. He said, had a good life, 5 generations of Powell under his tutelage. So there's signs all saying, if something happens, don't call the hospital. He's ready to die. And so 24 hours, someone's sleeping with him or being with him. And so I'm on my watch. I'm sleeping with him. I'm in the room with him. And my dad wakes up. He has been unconscious. He wakes up and he leans over and he says, John? I say, yes, Dad. Surprised that he's talking. He said, I hope you're not too disappointed, but I don't think I'm going to die right now. When we talked to the doctors, they said, not possible. Not possible. We're the best hospital in Detroit. We have the best doctors in Detroit. And we can tell you what just happened can't happen. And then they said, how do you explain it? And a friend of mine who's written a book called Happiness for All, she did a study. And in the study, she looked at people's well-being, and it tracks very closely to socioeconomic status. So people who are really poor and struggling, they tend to have a lot of stress and not do as well. And it's a 20-country study over a 10-year period, and her data is consistent. And then there's this one group that's an outlier group. And this group is doing extremely well. And this group tends to be older African Americans who actually go to church and have close family relations. They are an outlier. They're doing better than almost any other group. And I asked her, I said, so what explains this? And she said, we don't really know. But we think it's the connection to each other, it's the family, it's the love, and it's believing in something greater than yourself in a real way. Not quote unquote academically, but living it. She said, we have to look at this more carefully because it surprised us. Now it's interesting. It's not younger African Americans. And it's not African Americans who don't have a community or a church. And it's not white people who go to church, because most white people who go to church, they go on Sunday and that's it. They go to church and I'm done. It was older African Americans going to church and with the family. And this was my dad. So I think that you have expressions of that here at Morehouse. And I think that is what Wakanda have. And I think that is what's missing in the United States right now. I live in the Bay Area. It's a techno haven. There's new something being created every day by high school kids. But I say, in terms of what we need in our society and in the world, there's no app for that. It's not a technical problem. It's not going to be fixed by Apple or Google. If it's going to be fixed, it's going to be fixed by people. And if it's going to be fixed by people, it's going to be fixed by a lot of people who look a lot like you. Now, again, people may not value that. But that's part of our problem. So, do we need historically black colleges? Now, you know all the data suggesting that historically black colleges graduate a disproportionate number of students in every field, but certainly the STEAM field, the science, PhDs. And the obvious question is, how and why? You have less resources than your historical white colleges, and yet you're doing better in terms of graduation. And what's the difference? There's a friend and colleague of mine named Claude Steele. He wrote a book called Whistling Vivaldi. Anyone heard of that book? Okay, a few. Whistling Vivaldi. Again, I want to share this with the athletes as well. Claude is he was the provost at Berkeley. He taught at Stanford, provost at Columbia. He's like crazy smart. And he came up with this concept called stereotype threat. And stereotype threat is predicated on the notion that everyone's identity can be threatened. And when your identity is threatened, you don't perform as well. Everyone. And he gives examples. I give a couple. He taught at Stanford, so he had women, Asian American women in his PhD class. And here was the experiment. They'd come in and he'd say, I love teaching here at Stanford because there's so many really smart women. And then half an hour later, he'd give them a math test. And they didn't perform well. From the same pool, women with exactly the same ability, the second group, they come in, and this time he say, I love teaching here at Stanford because there's so many bright Asian American women. They knocked it out of the park when he gave them the test. What's the difference? The first one, this is called priming. The first one, he activated their womanness. And there's a stereotype in society that women cannot perform well at math. And so once that stereotype has been activated, they actually conform to the stereotype and did not perform well in math. The second one, he activated the Asian Americanness. And there's a stereotype that Asian Americans are good at math. And then they perform well at math. He does this for all groups. I'll give you one more example. He has a group of men, white and black, playing golf. But before they play, here's the prime. The first group, he says, you know, people think golf is how strong you are, but golf is actually a mental game. It's the strategy you use in terms of playing it. So the best golf players are the smartest. Now go play. He sent them out, and what happens is the white guys, they do pretty well, and the black guys bomb. He brings in a second group, exactly the same ability. Only this time he says, you know, people overthink golf. Golf is really about rhythm and getting into the flow, just feeling your body. Now go play. Now this time the white guys bomb, and the black guys are cooking. They're conforming to the stereotypes in our society. So the title of Claude's book, Whistling Vivaldi, which I'd recommend to you, is based on a true incident, a set of incidents. He taught at Chicago, Hyatt Park, and the black professionals there, the black middle class, they were aware that white people tend to be afraid of them. So one of the things they would do when they'd be coming up against a group of white people is they would whistle Vivaldi. They would whistle classical music to put the white people at ease. Now again, for the athletes as well, there's strategies we use, consciously and unconsciously, to try to make white people be comfortable. Hands up. And while I understand that, it's done at a cost. So our real, maybe our most important gift, if we stay in touch with it ourselves, is taking our collective humanity, taking our interconnectedness, and sharing it with the world. My father's creeping up on his 98th birthday. And if I described his life to you, you would say, wow, hard life. He's legally blind. He's missing some fingers from having them cut off from work. He lost his mother when he was 11 years old. That's when he dropped out of school, went to work. Worked in the factory most of his life. But that doesn't really tell you my father. When people meet my father, what they experience is, this is one of the most loving, happiest, wise people you're ever going to meet. That gets missed. So what this country needs is my father. What this country needs is Wakanda. What this country needs is Morehouse. So I'll stop there and entertain questions or comments. I've never done this before, so I don't know how you do this. Yes, and tell me who you are.
My name is Daniel Jones. My question is, why should we continue to be invested in a healthy relationship with white people when time and time again they show us they seek nothing more than our destruction?
All right, good question. Did you see that movie?
Yeah, I saw it, and
I'll repeat the question.
I would be hesitant to share Wakanda with the world, given, like my mother told me, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And if
Okay.
you can extend that to the
Okay, so the question was, why should we be inclined to share whatever gifts we have with white people when they've shown us over and over again that they don't want to share with us? And the second comment was, in terms of the movie, I wouldn't be inclined to share Wakanda with the rest of the world because the rest of the world is not fit for it. So that was the comment. I think that was the movie. Great movie, incredible tension. So it's not an easy answer. So a couple of things. Most of you may know this, and this is a long discussion. I won't be able to have a chance to go into all of it. But as you know, race is socially constructed. So how did white people get to be white? What made them white? And not only white, and I say the problem is not white people, the problem is whiteness as an ideology. It's an ideology that's incredibly destructive, as you suggest. And I would suggest, in terms of that ideology, is not embraced just by people who are phenotypically white, and many people who are phenotypically white don't embrace it. But there are, as Jesse Jackson would say, just because someone is your skin folk don't mean they're your kinfolk. But you can flip that and say just because someone's not your skin folk doesn't mean they're not your kinfolk. I think we have to be careful of and one of the things to me that was great about this movie, because a lot of times we sort of have, quote unquote, good and evil, and we invert them. It's like, you're on top and you're doing me bad. Now I'm on top. You're going to get yours now, right? And what this movie represented, and I think what I'm suggesting, is that a deeper humanity, if people do stuff that's attacking you, you have to protect yourself. So there's the issue of restorative justice in the movie. It's not saying be simplistic, but it is saying you extend the possibility of humanity to all humans. You don't start off, and if we cut that off, if we start off, from my perspective of cutting that off, we don't end up just cutting ourselves off from them, we end up cutting ourselves off from our deeper selves as well. So it's a profound question. And I have this concept of calling bridging and breaking. Breaking is where you deny someone else's humanity. Bridging is where you acknowledge. And sometimes we engage in what I call defensive breaking. That is, people are denying our humanity, so I'm going to deny their humanity. But I think that's problematic. And I think there is another way. So I'll stop with that. It may not be sufficient, but I'll stop with that. But I appreciate the question. Yes. Tell us who you are.
Hello, Nick Cummings, freshman, computer science major from Miami, Florida. And my question is... Yeah, there you go.
I'll repeat the question. I can hear you, yes.
So my name is Nick Cummings, freshman, computer science major from Miami, Florida. So my question is, you're talking a lot about community and stuff like that.
Can you guys demonstrate a little bit of respect? Professor Powell is going to repeat the question. Give him an opportunity to hear the question. Thank you.
Talking a lot about building Wakanda here at HBCUs, especially the AUCs, and you're talking a lot about community. But how do you suggest, or maybe one of your ideas on building a community in this space, in this area?
Okay. Thank you. So that was Nick, and he was saying, how do we actually build the resources, take the resource to build a Wakanda here in Morehouse and at the other HCBUs? So a couple of things. It's you have consistently underfunded, under-resourced, and you're expected to do a great deal with it. So I would say try to get more resources and use your resources well. And what I'm suggesting is that even without the physical resources that you should have, and you should continue to advocate, and push for, you're already producing something that the historically white colleges with more resources is not producing. So you're already putting stuff out. But I'm saying to own that. You've heard a lot. We have a lot of resources if we can use them collectively. I was invited to a meeting. It got canceled because I think there was a terrorist attack or something. But I was invited to a meeting, I forget the exact number, but with 15 or 20 African billionaires who wanted to figure out how to give back. The meeting may still happen in the future. But if we start collectively using our resources, giving back some, then Wakanda becomes more real. We don't have to wait. We can do stuff right now. We can do stuff within our families, within our communities. And again, I think the athletes being here is an example of that. It's people who have, quote unquote, in the physical sense, made it, who are saying, how do we give back? That it's not good enough for me, John Powell, to make it if my family can't make it. One of my favorite things is with James Baldwin, where he's invited into high society, but they say you have to leave your brothers and sisters behind. He said, no thanks. He wrote a book about it called The Price of the Ticket, that if I can't bring my family along with me, I don't want it. So I think we have time for maybe one more question, and I want to make sure I give people in the back a chance as well. If not, I'll come back up here. Anyone in the back there? And it's hard to see. Okay, I think there's one right here. So if I understand the question is, how do we keep that same positive community that was demonstrated in the Black Panther going forward? How do we make it real? And, you know, the reality is there are going to be ups and downs. They're going to be the Clarence Thomases of the world who, again, are skin folks, but they are working very hard to keep black people down. We're going to have white co-conspirators who work with us. Part of it, I think, is to own it. Part of it, I think, is to name it. Part of it is to celebrate it. And again, that's why the movie in some ways was so important. It named stuff that many of us already knew, but it gave it voice. So you will have different ways of doing it, through culture, through music, through teaching, through money, through volunteering, but to lift it up. You know, don't hide your lamp under a bush. And it won't necessarily be easy. But I would say, and I'm going to end with this because I know Professor Davis said, if I don't let you out of here at 11:50, you will just walk out on me. And I don't want you walking out on me. I'm walking out with you. What I would say is this. I really do believe, and I did postgraduate work in Africa. I had a chance of having dinner, a private dinner with Nelson Mandela. He was one man, but he was one man who was part of a larger organization. And by holding on to something, he created a vision that's not perfect and certainly not realized in South Africa or any place else, but it's still a beacon, it's still something to lead us. So I think all of us, individually and collectively, if we sort of name that, hold on to it, articulate it, there's a chance. If we don't succeed, and there's no guarantee that we will, then we're toast. I literally think that this issue of how we live together or not is the #1 issue in the world, along with climate change. So I have a granddaughter, and I'm convinced that she will have a wonderful place to live, in part because of the work that comes out of here. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Powell. There is a scan. I'd like to ask you to wait. I'd like to ask you to wait. I'm asking for your best audience comportment this morning. Before we scan in, let's join arms and sing the Morehouse hymn.
Dear old Morehouse, dear old Morehouse, we have lived our lives to thee, and will ever, yea, forever, give ourselves in loyalty, true forever, true forever, to old Morehouse may we be. So to bind each son the other into ties more brotherly. Holy Spirit, Holy Spirit, make us steadfast, honest, true.